Welcome to LinkedIn Talent Connect. I'm very excited to be here. My name is John Vlastelica, and I have an awesome name that's really fun to say. And for 44 years, I've been pronouncing my name wrong. I went to Croatia, where my people are from, and I learned that I'm saying my name wrong, which is just awesome. Is someone Croatian? What's a Croatian clap? Anyways, but I'm going to say John Vlastelica. I'm with Recruiting Toolbox. We are going to talk about personas. And how many of you would like to recruit faster and get better quality people? Yay, right? Okay. So what we're going to talk about today, I think, can impact that. Let me give you a little context about my background quick. This is the credibility slide. But I was a recruiting leader at Amazon and Expedia, and I was at Amazon in the early days. Started in March of '98 before everything went crazy, and I was head of global recruiting at Expedia as well. And as a consultant, I get to work with all kinds of really interesting organizations. And I share this only somewhat to impress you. Mostly, though, because we get to work with all these companies, and we have conversations with thousands of hiring managers and thousands of recruiters, and we talk about pain. We talk a lot about, as consultants, like, where does it hurt? It hurts when I do this, then don't do that, and then we give them something else to do. But we talk a lot to organizations about how they can improve speed and quality. We talk a lot about their process, the role of the hiring manager, what recruiters can do, what things we can do in central teams to help the people that are on the front line recruiting. And as part of those conversations, we learn about kind of process opportunities, ways we can be more efficient so we can go faster, speed, and get better talent quality. And what I want to do today is to share some of what I've learned, both as a consultant and as a practitioner, about a concept that was frankly new to me about 10 years ago around personas. How many of you have heard of personas before? Outside of just the fact that you came in this room with a big sign that says personas, but you've heard of personas before. So what I want to do is I want to talk today about how we can leverage this idea of marketing personas. I think most of the innovation that's happening in recruiting, frankly, most of the innovation that's happening in our space is coming out of three big areas right now. I would say marketing is one big area, another is supply chain, and another is around analytics. And so marketing persona concept, as I know of it, has been around since the late 90s. It got very popularized. And I want to talk to you a little bit about what a persona is. I want to spend some time talking to you about some of the lessons I learned from building personas and how it helped the sourcers or the recruiters who are doing a lot of outreach work. I want to talk to you also how to build personas in your organization. And I can tell you, if there's anyone that's a professional marketer in here, you're going to hate me, because I'm going to do all that in an hour, and people spend big bucks building marketing personas, $50,000, $100,000, $200,000 plus to work on this kind of stuff. We're going to cram it all into an hour. So when I say soccer mom, let's talk about what a persona is. When I say soccer mom, what comes to mind? What do you think of when you think of soccer mom? Throw something out to me. Minivans. What else? Overbearing. What else? Sweatpants. Where do they shop? Where do soccer moms shop? Target. Probably. Or, yeah, they wear their $1,000 outfits, yeah, out on the thing, drinking their thing of wine. When I say soccer mom, what kind of things, what do they drive? What does soccer mom drive? And what's in the back seats, and what's in the little cup holders? Coffee, Starbucks, there's probably juice boxes, there could be car seats, right? When I think of soccer moms, there's certain things that come to mind. A soccer mom is an example of a persona. It's an example of a collection of behaviors, buying patterns, that we in our brains, kind of when I say this, we already have some things associated with it. And so when I think of personas in a marketing context, and I think of soccer mom, first of all, I think of Posh Spice when I think soccer mom. But when I think of a persona, or the concept of persona in a recruiting context, I'm really thinking about a target candidate profile. And a lot of us talk about target candidate profiles as part of our jobs as recruiters. We go in and meet with the hiring manager, and we find out what the hiring manager's preferences are. Personas are a level up. If understanding what the rec and candidate matching requirements are is C-level, personas are like at 10,000 feet. And 30,000 feet is like your overall talent strategy. Personas are a level up. I'm not going to read this definition to you, but I'll give you guys a copy, a PDF of these slides if you're interested. I'll give you the link at the end. You can download it. But a persona really is around a cluster of users. So we'll have personas, plural. There'd not be a big reason to just build one persona. The idea is you build multiple personas. And I'm going to walk you through a little bit of the journey that I undertook to build out personas around software engineers. So one of my clients, Edmunds.com, I was down doing some hiring manager training for them, and in the room we were in, they had a picture of this middle-aged white guy on the wall. And I roamed around their offices, which are very cool in Santa Monica, and they had lots of pictures on the wall when you go around corners of all these different people, and they had names like Henry on them. And I was surprised because they didn't have all this detail, but I was surprised because I didn't understand why they'd have these pictures up there. And when marketers are thinking about where they're going to invest their money, when they're thinking about design, when they're thinking about what app they're going to create, the functionality, they're thinking about the segmented marketing messages that they're tailoring specific to a particular buyer, they're thinking in persona terms. That's what marketers use. And so Henry is an example of a real persona write-up that Edmund said I could share with you guys. And it's basically highlighting his behaviors, his characteristics. It's talking about what he needs from a car buying experience. And Edmunds, of course, helps people buy cars. So this is an example of one. When I think about what a persona would look like in a recruiting context, or to kind of set up a story to kind of build a case for how we might use something like that in recruiting, I'll tell you guys a little bit about my own adventure around this. I was at a company that had over 400 software engineers to hire. We were freaking out. I was freaking out, at least. Maybe not everyone was freaking out, but I was freaking out because that was a lot. That's a lot of software engineers. We had a new sourcing function, and sourcing functions weren't that common back then, but I was trying to figure out, man, how am I going to make sure that we really understand the profiles of all the people we need to go after? So 400 software engineers to hire a new sourcing function, and then on top of that, we had a technology organization that was decentralized. So it wasn't like you just hire software engineers into one big pool. There's all these groups all over the place that are hiring similar but not identical roles in different parts of the organization. And we didn't have a good prioritization model. So on top of all of that, if I found a really good engineer, I wasn't exactly sure who should get that engineer first. And so I, as an individual recruiter, of course, optimized for filling my recs, even if on behalf of the company, it would have been better if I would have rerouted that candidate to another group. There wasn't a good prioritization scheme. Does that make sense? Can you guys relate to any of this? A lot of recs, not great prioritization, yeah. So what was I trying to solve as a leader, and how did personas come into kind of my world? So I was trying to figure out, if I've got a central sourcing team or even sourcers that are embedded with recruiters, how am I going to get them up to speed on the individual hiring manager requirements? And one of the things I imagined, of course, is like, wow, wouldn't it be great if a sourcer and recruiter could go to every single strategy, kickoff, intake, whatever you call that meeting? That's not going to scale, right? 400 positions that are going to open up all around the same time. That's not going to work. I was thinking about how hot the market was, and I was doing the math. You guys ever do the math just to freak out your hiring managers and say, if we had to hire 400 software engineers, how many offers is that? 500 offers. How many interviews is that? If you have a 5-to-1 ratio, 2,500 interviews. How many phone screens is that? Oh, if you got 3-to-1, 7,500 phone screens you got to make to get to 400. And that's the kind of math I started doing, and I started realizing I have got to figure out a way to build some efficiency into this. We just don't have the man or woman power to do all these screens. If I could take it from 5-to-1 to 4-to-1, what a gigantic impact that has on my funnel metrics in terms of how many candidates I have to go after. If I could close more candidates at the offer stage, what a big difference that would make. And really, really upstream, if I could just make sure that when we're doing outbound recruiting, outbound sourcing, that what I'm selling is really appealing to this person, what a gigantic impact that would have on efficiency for me and just on our capacity, right? I could do a lot more if I could get that figured out. Our job descriptions sucked. How many of you have job descriptions that suck? Be honest. The ones who are not raising your hand, you're suck too. You just don't know that, but. Job titles sucked. Anyone use weird acronyms in your job titles? I had the craziest job. I had SCOS engineers, S-C-O-S. People didn't know what that stood for. 2 PTLs. All these terms that were internally used, people didn't know. Sometimes new recruiters would come on board. I actually overheard a recruiter, not at this company, a different company, who was, I could tell, doing a phone screen and being asked a question about what the department acronym stood for, and he said, I'll have to get back to you on that. And I was like, oh my God, how bad is it that you don't even know your own internal acronyms, right? Selling was something I was thinking a lot about. How are we going to sell these jobs? We can do what I call the 3 C's, company, culture, comp. That's core to how you sell, but obviously I needed a more tailored message. If I want to improve those ratios of submit to interview, interview to offer, offer to hire, I need to tighten that up. I need to make sure I'm really, really effective at selling early on in the sourcing process all the way through. And then I was realizing that just the mindset that we were having, which was very rec-oriented, wasn't going to work. In other words, if I'm a recruiter and I call up and say, hey, I'd like to talk to you about rec number 1, 2, 3, 4, it's a SCOS engineer, whatever, and you're not interested, you're not available, you're not a good fit for this particular role, I'm probably going to say thank you, and I'm going to put you out into the universe and wish you the best, right? I'm going to leave you in the ATS, put it in the database, and hopefully some other recruiter will find you. If I'm a good recruiter, I might kind of pass it along and say, hey, we shouldn't lose this person, not good for me. But most recruiters have 20, 30 recs they're working on, and I can't be recruiting for other people's recs. I got my own rec. So I was also thinking about just our orientation around sourcing was very rec-oriented. I wanted to fix that. Can you guys relate to any of these things so far? A few of these things? So personas. So aren't we already using personas? I'm going to give you some more examples of this as we go, but you probably have our components around persona work. Job descriptions we have, even though they suck. We have job families. Compensation kind of breaks out jobs into categories, and that's getting close to what a persona is. We have rec sourcing strategy profiles, so we meet with hiring managers and we capture what they're looking for. That's great, but again, that's at C-level. That's really finding out what that individual manager's preferences are. That's not really at the 10,000-foot level looking at what soccer moms want, which are different than different types of moms, maybe. Campus allocation model. Some of you have a process where if you go on campus and you interview a bunch of engineers, you interview a bunch of MBAs, you have a process to how, who's going to get who, because it's, you're not looking for a rec, you're trying to fill a pipeline with great campus talent. And then most of us have good employer branding messages. How many of you have employer branding messaging that is customized or tailored to a specific audience? That's great. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But one of the challenges I had is that a lot of our messaging, some of which I created, was very generic. It was good, but it was high level. It was 30,000 feet. Why I work at this company, not specific to kind of the soccer mom type of persona. So when I was working on this project, I was working on it in the context of software engineers. And you could do this for salespeople. You could do this for different kinds of financial analysts you might have. But if you have a lot of the same kind of jobs, the same category of jobs, same function that you're going to hire, one of the things you do when you kind of get up from the rec level and you go to 10,000 feet or 30,000 feet is you realize they're bucketed. They're naturally bucketed into different flavors. And when I say flavors, I mean personas. So I looked at the software engineering role, software development engineer role, and said, what are some of the core requirements we have? And so we listed out, these are the base things that go across all the software engineers we're going to hire. Every software engineer needs to have a computer science degree and a background, and need to have experience in different programming languages, understand maybe agile, and understand operating systems. That was maybe core. And then there's some core competency kind of stuff that most of you guys have in your companies. And then I took a look at what are the different flavors of software engineers. One of the things I realized is that about 80% of our 400 plus software engineers we had to hire fit into these 5 buckets. These were the 5 buckets. So we had algorithm or artificial intelligence software engineers. We had front-end engineers. We had high transaction system or back-end engineers, tools engineers, quality engineers. These were the 5 big buckets that we were looking for. And so I looked at this information and I said, well, if I were to better understand each one of these as separate, discrete kind of types of software engineers, and I did that really well and I involved all the hiring managers that were hiring for that kind of profile, couldn't I have kind of an Uber intake meeting? Couldn't I really accelerate that intake meeting so that if I got them to agree on kind of what we were looking for, rather than doing it at the rec level, if I went up a level to 10,000 feet and I got all the great algorithm people in a room and all the great hiring managers for algorithm people, whether they were in this department or that function or this geography, but got them all together, and we started to agree on kind of a core profile for that category of software engineer, that persona, wouldn't that help me? And the answer, of course, is absolutely it helps, right? Because it gives me the ability to go faster, and it also focuses me. Sometimes our intake strategy meetings, there's a lot of assumptions, and frankly, sometimes as a recruiter, we optimize for that hiring manager's preferences over what the business really needs. So this would kind of weed out some of that, I don't like job hoppers, I only want people with military, I don't want someone that's been a consultant for too long. Some things that are maybe really specific to that hiring manager preference, I can kind of weed some of that out and focus in on what the organization is looking for. Does that make sense? So last kind of concept slide, and then I'm going to kind of give you guys some examples. So this is how I think about personas. Personas are those, I guess, orangey, kind of yellowy kind of section in the middle. When I think about sourcing, selecting, and selling candidates, when I think about sourcing, I think about there's generally speaking, if we go on the sourcing thing here from bottom to top, there's generally speaking certain companies and schools that you want to get talent from. As a company, you might like talent out of Big 4 firms. You might like talent out of big technology companies, companies that are known for having great sales programs or cultures that are similar to yours, and then companies that you generally don't like. So there's some stuff on sourcing that's general. And then as you kind of move up and go from kind of the 30,000 level foot down, but as you move up on this slide, engineering targets, there might be certain companies that you like to get engineers from. So maybe Microsoft or Google might be examples. As you move into the persona level, what you're really saying is, I want the search group at Google. I want the fraud group from Visa. I want the shopping cart and order management team from Walmart.com. Those are the companies, but those are the specific groups I'm looking for. I don't just want generally good schools. I want someone out of Waterloo's artificial intelligence program. Like, that's where I'm getting that specific. And then as you move up to the rec level, the job target level, that's when you're talking to the hiring manager about their specific profile, right? So I was thinking, we have this general stuff. We generally know what companies, we generally know kind of the kinds of companies for engineers, and we know what the hiring manager wants. But in between there, it'd be great to have some stuff that allows me to focus my spend a little better and not just say I'm spending this on software engineers, but I'm spending this on an artificial intelligence person, or I'm focusing this in on a high transaction systems person or whatever. If you do selecting, same kind of thing applies. You probably all, how many of you have competency models at your company? Like, you know, you do an interview training. This is what we mean by culture fit, and you have 10 core competencies, right? You have those things. For engineering, you might add in some things like problem-solving skills, or maybe there's a different way of thinking about communication. Maybe there's a user focus in there. Maybe there's something around agile. As you move up to a persona match, it might get even deeper than that. It might be more specific, not just on the soft skill side, but it might be that this person has to interface with the public a little more. This person has to lead meetings. This person is more involved maybe in something that is outside the norm for an engineer to do and really kind of different, or the technical background they need to have becomes more specialized, more specific. And then of course when you get to the job match, you're looking for someone that's going to match the salary requirements, the availability requirements, qualifications. And then same thing on selling, you can go up the levels there. So what does an example of a persona look like? This is a summary of one of these. This is for an algorithm and AI software engineer. And so this is Alex, and the woman that helped me run this project, I'm going to give you her name and one of her books that she's written on this. I just so happened to work with someone who was really good at personas. So when I discovered this concept, I was able to engage someone who now has written one of the authoritative books. I didn't know she would write the authoritative book, but she ended up writing one of the authoritative books on this subject. So I had a real expert helping me at the time. And so this is an example of a summary. So Alex leverages math, stats, algorithms to solve big problems. He is probably working on machine learning. He's working in search, information retrieval, data warehousing groups. Those become keywords I could source for, but more importantly, they become areas to give me an idea of what kind of work he's doing. What makes him different? Total fanatic about math. Really into logical solutions, and everything he does, he has to be able to measure, okay? Target companies are using big data, terabytes of data. Probably has a master's or PhD degree. This is a software engineer that's probably gone beyond a bachelor's degree because of the focus area. And if we're selling this candidate, and I'm working at the company I was working at, I'd probably want to sell the fact that we have this gigantic database, we have these massively complex algorithms that we're building across our organization, because this is an algorithm guy. So I want to sell algorithms to this guy. Where do algorithms show up? I don't just say generally we're doing really interesting work around algorithms. I'd want to be more specific. So I might say, hey, on the front end, we have these recommendations engines that are looking across 20 million products, 100 million customers, 100 geographies, and we're trying to figure out how to optimize kind of what we recommend to people when they come to shop on our site, kind of thing. On the back end, it might be that, hey, we have 1,000 warehouses around the world, and we're trying to optimize for both delivery speed but also shipping costs, so that if we have your product in Reno, Nevada, and Louisville, how do you guys say that? Louisville? From Seattle. I say Louisville. Louisville, isn't that how you say it? Who's from, someone tell me. Don't you say like something weird like that? Louisville. All right, anyways, so if you're from one of those two places and you've got one product that in the same order that's in each place, do we ship them separately, or do we send one over here? Do we order a new replacement one here and wait till we get there? And how does that impact availability, shipping costs, those kinds of things? So being able to talk specifically about the challenges is great. This is Alex. This is an example of painting a picture for Alex. If I look at Isabel, Isabel is a user interface engineer, still a software engineer, still might have gone to great schools and still generally is interested in complex engineering problems. But Isabel looks different. She is really driven by creative practical, scalable design. She's very interested in user behavior, and she's probably working on e-commerce sites. She's probably even involved somewhat in product design or what the user experience is. And she is also interested not so much in math, but in measuring. So she's very interested in measuring behaviors on websites. What makes her different? She loves making things people are going to use. She's very user-centric. She's always going to be fighting for the user experience. She's less likely to be motivated by general big problems, probably more of a social engineer than other types of engineers. And she's probably not only working at big e-commerce websites, but also has a degree that is not just computer science, but has a UI specialization. When I'm selling her, it would be a mistake to sell her on the things that Alex was interested in because her interests are different, right? So I'm going to talk to her about the fact that she could do usability tests on a website that gets 50 million people on it every month, right? I'm going to talk to her about the scale of what we do and how design and how front-end work is valued so much by our company. And I'm going to give her examples of how people that are in front-end software engineering positions that have done this kind of stuff on our site have led to this better conversion, which contributes to this bottom line. She's probably more business-oriented. Does that make sense how those are different? High level, they're both software engineers, really, really different. So what do you do when you're trying to collect this kind of information? I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a walkthrough in a few minutes on how you might run focus groups to get some of this, and I'm doing the very, very scrappy, very fast, whole thing has to fit into an hour version. But generally when I'm going after persona stuff, a lot of this sounds like the kind of questions we would ask if we're doing a rec intake meeting. A lot of this sounds like the things that we would be going after if I'm sitting down with a hiring manager. But you'll notice there's a few different things in here. When I'm talking about the who, I really want to understand what he's working on, what drives him, how is he different than other engineers, job titles. I probably want to have some sample resumes. And I want to make sure that if I get a sticky note that says, Andrew is a phenomenal software engineer, please give him a call, John, that I know a couple questions I can ask very early on in the conversation to figure out if I'm talking to an Alex or an Isabel. Right? So I want to figure out very early what are some questions I can ask to understand if I don't have a resume, if I don't have a LinkedIn profile, and I just met someone or I'm just reaching out cold, how can I figure that out? On the source side, a lot of stuff you're used to seeing on here. One of the things that I think is really helpful is to get from the business who the dream team would be, and then also, of course, do a deep analysis of where your past hires have come from. When you're selling, you want to make sure that you have something more than the 30,000-foot kind of EVP, why work at my company kind of stuff. You want to make sure you have tailored messaging. One of the most important things around personas, and this is true at the rec level as well, is to make sure you know the magnet people. So the people on the team that are doing cool work. Does someone have a patent? Does someone publish something? Is there something cool? Someone left that really cool brand name company to come here because they thought they could make a bigger impact on the world. What are the magnet people? And then what are the magnet projects? And I don't mean just that the hiring manager's working on, because we're not thinking at the rec level. I'm thinking across your company. What are the types of work that this kind of engineer in this context could do? Are there white papers we can use? What are the comp issues? Why do people usually turn us down? What is the acceptance criteria? If someone is going to come to our company, what do they usually walk through when making their decision? Are there things that are kind of unique to this persona? And then if they have concerns, what are the typical concerns? And a concern might be, I don't want to show up at your company and find out you guys aren't sophisticated enough to leverage my big PhD brain, and that the work you're doing is you kind of treat it as kind of a side project. I want to know that what I'm doing is core to your company. And I got to admit that based on what I know about your company, I wouldn't think that's true. Well, if that's a perception out there, I want to understand that for that persona. And I want people on the inside to be really honest with me about the concerns they would have about our company, so I can work with my hiring managers, some of whom suck, but work with some of my hiring managers that are more savvy around selling, but more importantly, work with high performers in this space to understand, so how do we address that, or why did you come here? On the screening side, getting screening questions and those kinds of things pre-built can be really helpful. One of the clients I'm working with right now, we're having a debate about whether or not product managers should be sitting in on software engineering interviews. And there's a lot of internal debate around that. Somewhat debate around the weight that the product manager should have in interviewing a software engineer. But also there's questions around what kind of message does it send, good or bad, to the candidate to have an hour of a 4 or 5 hour interview with a product manager. Some candidates, when we did recent hire kind of work, said we really liked talking to the product manager. Others felt like they ended up talking to someone that was kind of weak technically and it was a bit of a turnoff. So one of the things that I like to do as a persona process is identify what would a really good interviewing process look like, who should be on the team, and of course if I have that information, my recruiting coordinators and schedulers are going to love me because I can pre-build interview schedules, right? And then the last thing is just around what I call kind of rules of engagement. If we get someone like this who's good, what do we do with them? Is there a prioritization scheme? Do people have to kind of raise their hand to get some of these? When we bring people into interview, do we have multiple groups? Because there are multiple groups that hire these people. Do we have multiple groups interview, or is it just one group at a time? And if they don't want them, then it goes to the next group. Like, what are the rules of engagement? And a lot of the rules of engagement have to do with prioritization. So what are the benefits? Based on what you've heard, what is an example of something you could imagine? If you had something like a persona, something that was at that 10,000 foot level that was specific, what's an example? We got some mics here, but if you want to yell it out, I'll repeat it. What's an example? Could a persona help you? Could you imagine having something like this that could help you go faster or get better quality candidates? Anyone? What's that? Yeah, you could bucket recruitment activity. So you could do an event or a campus visit or a source-a-thon just around a certain type of skill set, right? You could have interview days just for that type, which sometimes bucketing things or batching things can really help you with efficiency and also speed a lot because you make decisions right there. Everyone's very focused. What's another benefit? Yeah, one of the biggest advantages that a headhunter has, I think, versus a corporate in-house recruiter is if you're not interested in my candidate, I can kind of send them to other potential, buyers, if you will, and I have the opportunity then to make a placement. If I'm a recruiter thinking about rec number 1, 2, 3, 4, and you're not a fit for 1, 2, 3, 4, and I hang up, and I just basically put you back out into the universe or stick you in the ATS and hope someone finds it, what a missed opportunity, right? But if I'm a recruiter who understands or a sourcer who understands that we have multiple groups that hire for this, and I don't have to know each hiring manager specifically, I just know that as a company, we need this talent in these 4 places in the company, and we need an Isabel, we need to hire 25 Isabels this year and 50 Alexes this year, whatever your numbers are. That's a real advantage to me as a recruiter. I have a higher chance of making a placement internally, but also for the business, I'm making sure we're not losing out on good talent. So I put some benefits together, but the first thing I want to tell you guys is a story very quickly. I was working at a company. There was a recruiter who was sitting outside my office, and he was reading a job description to a candidate. $80 an hour recruiter, reading a job description to a candidate. And I wanted to poke his eyes out and fire him on the spot. And I also realized he was still relatively new to the company, but it was very, very clear that he did not have the right kind of conversation with the hiring manager and that his credibility sucked with this candidate. I can only imagine what it was like on the other end of the phone to have a job description read to you. You will be responsible for, must have 10 years related experience. And then I could tell the candidate was asking him questions. He's like, I'll have to get back to you on that. So together with me, we're going to say this Talent Connect oath number 1. We're going to say, friends don't let friends read jobs. Ready? So on the count of 3, ready? Friends don't let friends read job descriptions to leads or candidates. So first thing is having your sourcers or your recruiters, whoever's doing outbound work, be more credible is worth $1 million. Like your brand, your ability to engage talent like this is huge. And the second thing is, oh my God, I can't believe how much time is spent guessing at what hiring managers want, right? Can I get a hallelujah out there? Do you guys ever feel like that? So there is such an opportunity for us to make sure that we really understand what the hiring manager wants. However, I see some recruiters get so myopic, so specific. This hiring manager doesn't like people that have had more than 3 jobs in 6 years. They just won't even look at them. So you go in the reject pile. They would never hire someone from a regional state school. They don't like military experience. They don't like to see a gap in the resume at all. They don't like contractors, so we get rid of those. And I hear this and I go, my God, you could be missing out on such great talent. So the second one is, read it with me here, guys. Friends don't let friends waste time sourcing against poorly defined profile. It just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it, when you say that? But so that's another thing, is that what a waste when we're out there trying to guess at what the hiring manager wants. And unbelievably time-consuming to go out and meet with maybe every single one of the hiring managers in this space. So what are some big benefits from these? I'm going to share a few with you guys, and you've hit a couple of them, so thank you. One is that your intake strategy meetings go way faster. If I've got a pre-built persona, if I've already got something that's already pulled together, the things that were in those kind of 5 columns on who I'm looking for and where they work now and their motivators and interviewing and such, I get to go a lot faster when I'm engaging with the hiring manager. My recruiter goes in and is at the 50th, 70th, 80th, 90th yard line already, and we're just talking about the minor things to tweak, which means instead of spending an hour or half an hour, I might be able to spend 10 or 15 minutes because some of the stuff we're already pre-closed on. I know some of the targets. I know maybe the profile. I might know the interviewing and selling strategy. And I also know in the organization who is the consumer of this kind of profile, which hiring managers buy these kinds of candidates. candidates. The second thing on the quality side is that ideally, I'm going to have a better match, right? So my ability to go out and engage candidates and present them to a hiring manager and have the hiring manager say, I want to talk to these people, is drastically improved because I've already worked with these hiring managers to develop these personas, and I know already that this is a good match, and I can refer back to those conversations or back to the persona. Now again, the hiring manager may have specific needs that I need to tweak around. A hire submit to screen ratio, one of the recruiters that I did some work with at a company told me that she got so good at this, not because of personas, but she got so good at understanding what the hiring manager was looking for that the hiring manager didn't even need to review resumes or do a phone screen, that they felt confident just to bring them in based on the recruiter screen. And a lot of you have that relationship with some of your hiring managers. It would be awesome if we got to the point where we could just bring them in and schedule them and skip that step. When you want to talk about cost savings, if you go to the third column and talk about cost savings, yes, better understanding your target market will help you spend your money better. It'll help you spend the marketing dollars you spend to go after this talent, to attract this talent. But even more importantly, if you could improve some of those ratios, submit to interview, interview to offer, offer to accept by 10 or 15% each, have one fewer candidate you have to talk to get a hire, that is huge cost savings, you guys. It's cost savings in hard dollars, and, less travel costs, and it's cost savings in soft dollars with people not spending time on candidates that aren't going to get hired. So these are some of the big benefits of this. There's a bunch of other things. I'm not going to read through all these, but I was going to highlight one organization that used this concept, built different website content. So when you came to the career site and you were looking for a job as a software engineer, as an example, it would ask you questions to help identify what kind of engineer you are, and then give you content. Before it just dumped you into the big search for the open job thing, it would give you some content that was tailored to that kind of work. So it would describe the actual work and the projects, not just describe or kind of point you to just the traditional job description or job posting. Targeted employee referrals. One of the big crazy things about employer referrals to me is that when I work inside companies and I walk around in the hallways and the lunchrooms and I see the employee referral poster, the poster and pray strategy, right? So you got the poster up. One of the things that I struggle with is it makes an assumption that employees are going to go out to your career site and search your 387 openings and find the perfect match and route them, and they're going to do that work. And I think, what if we had a way to make more targeted, solicited referrals requests from people? So what if we could talk to people about the personas, and we could teach our company about the different flavors of software engineers or salespeople or whatever. Pipelining, one of the things that I know a lot of organizations are trying to figure out is how can we create pipelines, and how do we even define our pipelines? Facebook very famously uses more of a pipeline model for the way that they recruit, and they have hiring managers and executives that are pipeline owners, and they, well, whether they call it personas or not, they leverage the concept that there are different flavors of software engineers that might want to work at Facebook, and so they have centralized interviewing and sourcing teams that align to these different pipelines, and so they're not thinking as much at the rec level as they are thinking at kind of what I would say the 10,000 foot level, something more like a persona level. So maybe the way you route candidates, the way you bring them in, doesn't look as rec oriented and looks a little different. If you're doing events, there's a big opportunity when you're going to an event to teach people very quickly about the kind of talent we're looking for, how to have a conversation with someone you're sitting next to at a conference like this. I sent some engineers off to not a career fair, but a tech conference once, and it was awesome. I armed this engineering manager with a bunch of business cards, and I said, hand these out, whatever. And he came back, and I said, did you get all those cards handed up? I gave him like 100. He goes, yeah, I had a hard time kind of handing them out in general, so I just took them and I spread them all over the men's room. I just thought I just put them all over the counter in the men's room. And I was like, what? He's like, yeah, I just spread them out. I just thought, since I wasn't going to use them, you didn't want them back, and you told me how to get rid of all of them. So and I was like, awesome. So one of the things you can do is to prep hiring managers on what the event strategy is, but give them a real idea of like who you're talking to and what, if you had to describe the work, as a hiring manager what you do, but do you know that there's other groups doing similar work, and being able to talk more broadly can be helpful. And then of course having better sourcing metrics. A lot of us look at, we do a lot of work looking at companies' metrics, and they're often quite high level. And so breaking them out to understand your interview to offer ratio by different personas, if these are critical high priority jobs, can be really insightful for you and give you a lot of assistance as you're going to try and figure out how can we tweak our process or how do we improve our sourcing strategies. If you were going to create a persona and you wanted to go and do this, these are generally the steps. This is a very scrappy rhymes with crappy, but scrappy way of doing this. If I were going to go and and say I want to launch into a project like this, I'd really want to understand why I'm doing this and whether or not it even makes sense to do this. One of the primary reasons to do this is you have a whole bunch of positions to hire in the year. So there's a bunch of similar kinds of roles, sales roles. Could be, at one point, I know Google was looking to hire hundreds of recruiters years ago in 2008 when I was working with them, and they had to go through a bit of a process to think about the kinds of recruiters they would need to hire. But if I have 100 or more positions that are similar, but there's tweaks within the buckets, or between the buckets, I'd probably look at a project like this. I'd want to think about which category I'd use and why. So a lot of organizations, I think this makes a lot of sense. Obviously, I'm using a software engineering example because that was my example, but software engineering, I think sales, there's different types of sales, right? There's inside sales, there's outside sales, there's kind of national account sales. There's different flavors of salespeople. You can't just say all salespeople are the same. Retail sales is very different than big kind of business-to-business kind of sales. So I think about the categories. I'd want to make sure that this doesn't feel like an HR project, like careful you got a little HR on you. Like we don't want that feel, right? This needs to feel like a business-led project, which means I want sponsors and stakeholders. I want people that are understanding the problem we're trying to solve and invested in this because I'm going to need some of their time. So I don't want this to feel like recruiting is doing a new job description project. That is not what this is. This is really about deeply thinking like these different flavors of whatever the job category is and understanding them so deeply that we do a much better job when we're doing outreach and a much better job of interviewing and selling them. And then, of course, you got to build the plan, and then you're going to go through a discovery process. And in the discovery process, before you start doing focus groups, and focus groups are a big part of this, you're going to want to pull job descriptions, metrics, resumes of past hires. You're going to want to have your EVP captured and in front of you, your competency model. You're going to want to have compensation information, maybe job families. You're going to want to have that kind of stuff in your back pocket, and you're going to want to start thinking about, if I look at all the salespeople or all the software engineers we have to hire in a year, how do they naturally bucket? What do I have that's kind of good core stuff that I can build on, going back to that model with the different levels? What's the kind of federal stuff that I have, the universal stuff, and what stuff now am I going to build kind of more at the state level? And then you're going to do your focus groups. You're going to develop the personas. You're going to validate them, and then you're going to finalize it and get it out there. One of the big opportunity areas for a lot of us in running a project like this is to hire a consultant to come in and help with that. And I'll tell you that I did have someone on the marketing team that I partnered with that was helpful for me, but most of us aren't going to have the budget to go get a consultant to help with this. So this, again, is kind of a scrappy way to do it. But I'm going to give you a little bit of insights into what you'd actually do in a focus group meeting so you could maybe take some of this back. So groups, it's all about getting inside the head of the people you're working with, so you want to involve the people. You would never just build this based off job descriptions, and I got to be honest, a lot of hiring managers do not know what they're looking for, and they're not super articulate at identifying the differences, so I'd want to make sure I have incumbents, high-performing incumbents involved. So if I were going to run something like this, this is the way I would run a focus group for something like this. One, I would identify persona groupings with hiring managers, so I'd figure out what jobs are we going to use, so what job category is worthy of this big investment. And I would think about which personas, so if we did software engineers, what are those kind of generally, what do we think the high-level buckets are? So try and break my 400 into some buckets. I don't expect all 400 to fit into 1 of 5 buckets, but if I can get more than 200 of them to fit in, that's probably worth it. The second thing is you're going to do a deep dive into each persona group. So I'm going to go and maybe work with the Alexes or just the Isabels, and I'm going to spend time, if it's sales, I might do a ride-along. If it's retail, I want to work the floor. If it's software engineers, I might want to spend time going over their big projects. I'm probably not going to watch them code. That's not going to be helpful. But having them kind of talk to me about their big projects, walk me through some of the big risks, some of the features and functionality they're working on, the scale of what they're doing. I'd like to spend some time with them and really, really get them involved in describing the work and help me understand their backgrounds, what they work on, why they like what they do, really understanding the motivators. Then what I want to do is I want to get people from different groups together. So I want to have people that are, if I did this in 5 different groups of personas and I went deep in each one of these 5, then what I want to do is I want to bring representatives from different groups together so I can understand the differences. What are the things that are the same across the board? What are those core software engineering requirements that everyone's looking for? And what are the things that are a bit unique to your persona? Does that make sense? So now I want people from different persona groups in the room to have the conversation. And then I want to go back once I've built these out and validate these with high performers and the different hiring managers. I'm going to give you guys an example. If I were still in a corporate recruiting role and I said I had to hire 100 recruiters this year, and you were to say to me, are there differences in the kind of recruiters that you want to hire? I would, of course, say yeah, right? Because there's different kinds of recruiters. What's an example of some of the different flavors of recruiters that exist out there? High volume recruiting is different than low volume recruiting. What's another example? Campus recruiters are very different, right? Very different skill set. They're still called a recruiter. What's another example? Technical might be different. Healthcare, executive recruiting might be different. You might have differences in full cycle recruiters. You may have some recruiters, I know one of the models a big technology company used years ago was they had client manager recruiters and they had candidate generation recruiters, right? So sometimes you split that stuff up. But I would say at the big level, you've got full cycle recruiters, you've got sourcers, you've got campus recruiters, and you've got executive recruiters. Do you guys say in general? So those would be 4 big persona buckets. Now, when I went deep into sourcers, I might learn that there's inbound sourcers that are just kind of dealing with referrals and job boards and career side and kind of mining our applicants, and then there's outbound. I might learn that there's researchers that are a little bit different than either one of those, that maybe don't even talk to candidates but are doing kind of competitive intel and research for us. When I look at campus recruiting, I might realize, well, not all campus recruiters are the same. Some are doing tech, some are doing MBA, some campus recruiters are doing kind of community college, kind of more entry-level kind of programs. So not all campus recruiters are the same. So what I do is I would spend time with each one of those buckets and learn about them. And then like on the campus recruiter example, I might bring all the recruiters together, and that's when I'd start to see that, wow, tech and MBA and community college campus recruiters are quite different. Campus as a whole is different than what sourcers do. What's an example of something, a skill set, a campus recruiter might need to have that might be different than an executive recruiter might need to have? Are there differences between the two? Beyond just the kind of recs they fill? A lot more event management probably in a campus recruiter than an executive recruiter, right? A lot more planning. Executive recruiters tend to be a little more business aligned, have lower volume they're working with. They have to have phenomenal client management skills. Not that you don't want any of those things in a campus recruiter, but campus recruiter I might optimize more for kind of their event management kind of skills, lots of volume. Everything they do is kind of in batch. Their process needs to be kind of consistent. Executive recruiters, there is no consistent process. Every rec, every leader, it's a nightmare. Every single interaction is different, right? I mean, there's not you don't say consistent executive process typically, right? So they're both gonna have to know process, but it's gonna feel different. So when I get them in the room, what I would do is give them sticky notes. And so you would see little sticky note pictures up here, which I found on Google. I have no idea if they're doing persona work, but just pretend like they're doing persona work. But one of the things that you might do is you might give each one of these groups, executive, campus, full cycle, and sourcer, a different colored sticky note. And then I would go back and I would refer back to those questions that really come from this. And I would say, all right, so you as a campus recruiter, what kind of things do you work on? I would put kind of the who column up on the board, and I would have them write on their yellow sticky notes what they work on, what drives them, what motivates you, what would entice you to kind of come to a company, what are you looking for kind of thing. How are you different from some of these other recruiters? What is your perception of how you as a campus recruiter are different than an executive recruiter or a sourcer or a full cycle recruiter? And I would have all the campus recruiters use yellow sticky notes, and I'd have the executive recruiters use blue and whatever. And then I would get this stuff up there, and I would go through, and as I'm collecting this and reading this, I would start to see, wow, some things are really similar, some things are very, very different, right? I would see those big differences. That helps me get at the kind of persona level stuff that I want to focus on. Once I have those kinds of things together, I would then want to come back and validate that and go back to the campus team and say, hey, I've written up an Alex overview, I've written up an Isabel overview for a campus recruiter. I want to show this to you, and I want to tell you, does this stuff resonate with you? Does this describe 90% of kind of who you are, how you behave, what your preferences are, the kind of work you like, the kind of interviewing experience you'd expect to go through, what's important to you, the kind of money you want to make, the process you'd like to go through as a candidate, those kinds of things. And I want to get to yes. I want to get that it captures most of it. And then I want to go back to the hiring managers and validate that that's what I have. Now, if I'm a recruiter who's trying to hire recruiters, so if I'm trying to hire 100 recruiters for the year and my recruiter comes to me and says, John, what do you need? And I say, well, in EMEA, we need to hire 5 campus recruiters, 10 full cycle recruiters, and 3 executive recruiters. You have got this 80th yard line, 90th yard line starting point because we've gone through this work, and we don't need to have the same kind of detailed rec intake meeting with every one of the different recruiting managers. Does that make sense? So huge, huge benefits to something like this. If I were leading focus groups, I would want to request that the high performers bring resumes, their resumes, project overviews, things they're doing, and anything they have on the kind of interview questions they ask candidates. Interview questions tell us what the interviewer values. So I'm not asking them about their favorite puzzle questions or where do you want to be in 5 years kind of questions. I really want to know when they get into the technical aspects or the functional expertise the candidate needs to have, what are they focused on? Because what I want to do is I want to use that as a way to kind of reverse engineer what the requirements are, what the background is, what makes this person great, what would good look like for this kind of person. For hiring managers, same kind of stuff, but also bring some selling points. And me as the facilitator, in addition to bringing some sample resumes, I'd want to bring some actual job descriptions, job postings. I'd want to bring some of our EVP kind of work and our employment brand messaging. I'd also want to bring some employment brand messaging from some of our known people competitors. So why would an Isabel want to do front-end engineering work here versus these other technology companies or these other retailers? And ask the team about that. I want to have that conversation. Why is it better here? And if it's not better here, that's okay to know too. I want honesty, but I want to understand what I'm up against. And then if I have some candidate feedback, if I've had recent hires come through and describe their process or how we could have sold them better, if I have any feedback from Glassdoor on what it's like to interview here or just do stuff here, that's the kind of stuff I'd like to bring as well. I think that brings some good credibility to the conversation. And then of course some of those metrics we talked about might be appropriate here, but I don't know if I want to kind of go down the rat hole with them with metrics. If you were to do a project like this, you might say, John, sounds like a lot of work. There's no way I would do this for all my jobs, and obviously you would not do this for all your jobs. Where would you start? And I would argue that if I were to prioritize which jobs to focus on if I want to do some persona work, I would want to focus in on those high volume jobs in the upper right that are really, really high impact to the company. So if I'm in healthcare, it might be nurses. Are there different kinds of nurses? Can I say all nurses are created equal? Of course not. I can't even say all salespeople. I can't say all recruiters. I can't say all software engineers. I mean, there's lots of job categories you could do this with. Think about your organization and say, what are the jobs that we hire a whole bunch of every year, maybe 50 or more or something like that, and what are the jobs that are really high impact, high value, that we'd get some return on investment for this. We'd actually get some benefit from investing time in something like this, because it is time consuming. It doesn't necessarily cost a lot of hard dollars unless you hire someone to help you, but if you do it yourself, or at least do 80% of it yourself, really, really valuable, and I think you can get a lot of the benefits we've been talking about. So those are the jobs I'd focus on. If you're going to work on a project like this, it would be awesome if you have someone in marketing. I guarantee you, if you have anyone in your marketing function that is any good at all, they have heard of personas, they've studied personas. If they have an MBA, they've taken classes that talk about this. This is a very, very common marketing topic. And when I kicked things off, I shared with you guys one of the opportunity areas I think we have in recruiting. A lot of the innovation should come from other areas. That's where I expect it to come from. And this is a concept that they know. I'm probably not the best sourcer in the world. I'm sure I could be a better leader. I am really good at engaging the business, phenomenally good at engaging the business. And one of the secret sauce to my success at different companies I've worked at is my ability to go out and get the business invested in recruiting and to take ownership for recruiting. This kind of project is really satisfying. It has nice deliverables. Like it's part of kind of the infrastructure of recruiting. Once you have these personas built, there's a lot of things I talked about earlier. You change your website content. You use these people again as focus groups for new marketing messages you want to run by. You have pre-identified people that are in these kinds of jobs, and it brings a level of sophistication to your work. So from my perspective, if you have someone in marketing that can help you, or sometimes these people the person that helped me lived in the user experience group, the UI design group, and so they were looking at how we were going to kind of rework the website or experiment with things on the website with personas in mind. So they were building out personas for our consumer part of our business. I wanted to bring that concept in, and she was able to help me bring that into the recruiting part. Does that make sense? So with that, guys, my goal was to go fast. Did I go fast? Yay, fast, and that's fast is better than slow. One of the things that I want you guys to do is to think about your profiles. I want you to think about the target candidate profiles that you have. I want you to ask yourself, could I go faster if I invested some extra time? Pay me now or pay me later. Would it be faster and more efficient for me to invest some time and maybe not doing full-on personas, but build something like a persona around big job groupings, get multiple hiring managers involved, and agree on some of the stuff so I could go faster? And the answer, of course, is probably yes, you could. I want to keep this really practical, and I would love to give you guys a couple recommendations. There's a magazine that just talks about personas a little bit if you want a very short one-page thing. User Experience Magazine has an article on personas. And then the woman that I worked with, Tamara Adlin, I haven't talked to her in years, but she's written a couple books, and this is like $20 for a Kindle version. the Essential Persona Lifecycle, your guide to building and using personas. This is a 240-page book that will walk you through the steps of building these out, explaining what they are, doing a much better job than I did in 49 minutes or whatever. So that's my goal. If you want a copy of this, you can download a copy. It's PDF. The password is in Talent. I would love to connect with you guys, and I want to make sure we had time for some questions, and I want to stop at 10 till, and it is 1:49. Nailed it. So would love to know with that. First of all, thank you guys for your time and sticking around. So I want to just a big thank you to you guys for laughing when I tried to be funny. So thank you guys for that. We have 2 mics back here. Do we have some questions? Anyone have some questions? If you want to run to the mic, or if you're in the front row, you can yell, and I will yell it back.
Is this on?
Is this on?
Hi.
Yeah. Hey.
Hi, my name's Alif. I'm a recruiter at Microsoft.
Hey there.
From Seattle, too. So this is all super interesting. I wanted to see if you would speak to some of the dangers of building personas, specifically in the technology space, when we are sort of in an environment where we're challenged to kind of a hacking culture and disrupting the market, and everything should be different every 5 minutes. And if you do this work, I do see a danger of you hiring a bunch of people just like you, or a bunch of people just like the people who are very good at being good at their company. Because you say, get the high performers, in a room. So could you speak to some of the dangers of recruiting based on a persona rather than sort of more of a gap analysis based thing where it's like, wow, we don't have this and we need to go find it?
That's a great question. And I imagine there are some dangers. But I'd first kind of make a point, and this is John Vlastelica's point of view. So I'm not telling you this is the way it is for all companies or clients I've worked with. When I think about companies that have a high hiring bar at scale, a high hiring bar deployed across the world, they really do have a profile. Right? When I think about a company like Google, there is a type of person in engineering who is successful at Google and a type that is not. Doesn't mean they don't have diversity and some hacker types and some, they very famously, and we might hear about that from Laszlo Brock, who's at this conference, I know. We might hear about some of the changes they made in interviewing. But when I think about like when Microsoft in its heyday, Microsoft used to be impossibly hard to get into, right? Really, really high hiring bar. Yeah. So I think that's true in some groups. But I mean, as a company, my point is, as a company gets bigger and bigger, the bar kind of tends to go down, not up. Or companies tend to be more kind of, we could be a place for everybody, right? This is a company where anyone could work. We have people at all different levels, all different backgrounds. And there's a risk in that. So I would challenge a little bit of the assumption that when I see companies that hire really, really well, they're very clear on a profile. And they have phenomenal talent. The risks you talked about are very real, and I think getting too caught up in let's hire people just like us, there's all kinds of studies that I don't know the URLs to find them, but that talk about how important diversity is as an example, not necessarily diversity in race and sex and religion and those kinds of things, but diversity in thinking, and that's a risk. However, when you're doing your persona work, what I found when I did this project is that not everyone looked identical anyways. Like we had people that had no degrees in the room with people that all came out of top 10 computer science schools. And so what we found is that there was things that were very similar, like their interests and motivators were very, very similar. I just said motivators, weird. Motivators. But I think one of the things that we have an opportunity to do then is to make sure we get a kind of a group of people that are from different disciplines, different backgrounds on purpose. What I found, we do a lot of work helping companies identify, kind of define their hiring bar. And what I found is when I work with teams, maybe not at the company level, but at the team level, so like just a technology team or a sales team, there really are some common denominator characteristics of the most successful people. It's really, I haven't found it that it's drastically different. Certain hiring managers have different preferences, and I'd be concerned about, I think a risk would be optimizing for one hiring manager in the same way that just optimizing for one persona profile. But generally speaking, I actually find a lot more similarity. I don't see as much danger as maybe you have. Do you want to share? Do you have a danger to share? No. Okay. No, but if you did, I'd love to learn.
We are always thinking about diversity of thought.
Absolutely.
Trying to think about folks that are going to challenge the way critical and challenging
Yeah.
products. So, I think about my hiring managers and they're Microsoft type, right?
Yeah.
They've been at Microsoft for a long time. And when they look for external talent, they ask me to hunt external talent when they tell me excruciatingly every time is basically prescribing stuff.
Yeah. So, but that's a different issue than optimizing. So let me repeat the thing. So one of the challenges is you have hiring managers that basically want to hire in their own image, right? And you're looking for diversity of thought because your CEO has said it's Microsoft 2.0 time or 5.0 or whatever it is. But there's an opportunity now to reinvent ourselves, which means we might need to hire differently. I'm working with a big company you guys have heard of that's based in the Midwest, and that's exactly what's going on. Is the company has been hiring a certain kind of person for years and years and years, and now there is an absolute kind of new sheriff in town. They are making a drastic change. One of the challenges as we were trying to build profiles for this company is that a lot of the people that have been incumbents aren't necessarily, it's not that the people aren't good, but their backgrounds and the work and the motivators we want them to have are different. And so they use this term over-indexed. They've over-indexed for this kind of profile, and we need to kind of re-index for this other kind of profile. And what's interesting then, of course, is that you can't just do that bottoms up, because if you go bottoms up and just talk to incumbents in the job, they're going to describe them. They're going to describe what they like, and they really like stability, and they like the predictability, and they like whatever. And you're saying, this is Microsoft 2.0. We're about invention and reinvention, and we're doing new product launches, and we're going into new categories, and we're going to be a totally different company now. If you talk to your incumbents, that may not be their background or their orientation, which means you need to spend more time with the leaders when you're validating this. And that's an example of a push and pull, I think, that's going on probably at Microsoft and a lot of companies that are reinventing themselves. You don't want to just replicate what you have. You want to kind of paint a picture aspirationally of where you're going, and that needs to be more of your persona. So that's a great point. And that was a 19-minute answer, so thank you for talking about that. Anyone else got a question? We got mics here. Yeah, question up front. I can hear you, but no one else can. But yeah, but I can repeat. I can repeat. So how often do personas change? How often do you need to...
How often do you refresh them? Because with the technology, it improves in the way that the demands that you have from our customers.
Yeah.
These personas are great, but they change.
They do, and that's the kind of thing that I would ask in a persona focus group is, what are the kind of things that are likely to change over the next year or two? What are the kind of things that are likely going to stay the same? So I would argue that the sample projects, the magnet people, the magnet projects that you highlight, those are going to change every year or so because you're going to have new projects, new initiatives you're working on. The core motivators of an Alex or an Isabel are probably not going to change that much. The schools you go to might evolve every 3 or 4 or 5 years, but they're not going to change every single year probably. So some things are going to change, but I would talk about that. I think that's a very reasonable question to ask during the focus group conversations when I'm validating is, how often, yeah, and it's not going to be like every year or 18 months or 3 years. It's going to be, well, this space is moving fast or this space isn't moving fast. Sales is sales, and as long as they have kind of digital new media kind of skills, I don't know what those are going to look like in the future, but what I really need is someone that can learn whatever those things are. So the thing that's not going to change is ability to learn new technologies really quickly. Like that's going to change. What are those technologies 3 years from now? I don't know, but we just got to make sure we hire people that have a history of learning and scaling up and kind of doing hockey stick kind of, learning curves, right? Maybe that's the thing that doesn't change. And then the specific technologies and stuff, maybe that is. Any other questions? You have your, oh, you're giving me the finger. Got it.
Right,
got a question here?
Real quick. As you look at the talent that you use for your personas,
yeah.
How do you overcome the kind of the bell curve effect of, well, if I only pick my top talent, well, what makes them top may not be consistent across the well-performing talent base. So how do you kind of address that bell curve of talent when you're addressing who to design personas around?
And that's a little bit related to the earlier question as well. That's a great question. I've actually found John's experience that there are advantages if I'm doing persona work. I wouldn't want to call the focus group a low performer focus group, but it would be. But one of the things I found is that when I asked some of these questions to high performers, that when I went around and talked to people that I didn't get them in a room and say you all suck and I want to learn how sucky people think about this, but I essentially wanted to talk to people that were not necessarily high performers and see if some of the stuff resonated. And I actually found that there were some differences, not in a focus group setting, but more one-on-one. And some of the recruiters talked about the difference between what the high performers described and what the others did. And so I think one of the challenges that you bring up is how do we make sure that, that we're capturing kind of all of what makes a high performer, and I would argue that's not actually what we're trying to do. We're trying to capture most. We're trying to capture the common denominator things that are different. There's always going to be something that is, and I don't mean like X factor kind of stuff, I mean, but there's always going to be things at an individual rec level, at a job and candidate level, that are going to help someone be a great performer. The quality of your manager might have something to do with that, how much you travel, the tools you have available, the size of your team, your rec loads as a recruiter. There's all kinds of things at an individual level that may impact your success. I'd want to leave some room for that. I wouldn't want to over-define this so that it was 100%, everyone has to look like this to be successful. I think that would be a mistake, and I don't think that's what personas try to do. So with that, I want to say thank you guys for your time. Thanks so much for not sucking as a group. I love working with you guys.